Get ready for the truth.
From the outer recesses of the human condition.
Welcome to Cosmic's Corner of the Universe.
Today on Cosmic's Corner
Of the universe!
Overpopulation.
If we just become and continue to become the exhaust pipe for all of this humanity from all of these third world countries who refuse to take responsibility vis-a-vis birth control and family planning, then there's nothing being solved.
Water shortages.
We are already exceeding the carrying capacity of the 48 states here in the United States. California and 6 other states are having severe water shortages that are going to become even worse.
Energy costs.
So can you imagine when oil depletes to the point where it costs so much, instead of $3 a gallon, it goes to $10 a gallon? In fact, Chris Steiner of Forbes magazine wrote a book called $20 per gallon.
End of civilization.
If we save all the immigrants, we will destroy our own civilization. That is a guaranteed fact. It will happen if we continue on this path.
Immigration disaster.
The Titanic is going too fast, and it's headed toward a population iceberg. If we do hit that 138 million more added to this country within 35 years, which is a blink of time, then we become the victim.
Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts. Cosmic's Corner of the Universe is next.
Frosty Wooldridge possesses a unique view of the world, cultures, and families. He graduated from Michigan State University in 1970 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in journalism and advertising. Frosty has bicycled around the globe 100,000 miles on 6 continents and several times across the United States in the past 45 years. He has authored many books and written hundreds of articles for 17 national and 2 international magazines. Frosty has had hundreds of guest editorials published in top national newspapers, including the Rocky Mountain News, Denver Post, and the Las Vegas Tribune. He has also written for the websites BeforeIt'sNews.com, AmericanDaily.com, and Rents.com. Frosty Wooldridge has guest lectured at Cornell University, taught creative writing at Michigan State University, and has presented environmental science and religion and ethics lectures at colleges and universities across the nation. He's a top radio and TV personality, having interviewed on hundreds of stations across the United States. His book, America on the Brink, The Next Added 100 Million Americans, and the Global Immigration Crisis will be the topic of our discussion today. Mr. Frosty Wooldridge, welcome to Cosmic's Corner of the Universe.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here, and it's a pleasure, Tim, and I hope that this discussion and this series of discussions creates a discussion and a national dialogue, if you will, for all Americans and all Canadians, and for those individuals and people around the world. This discussion needs to be foremost if not only the American people but the Canadian people and countries around the world hope to survive the 21st century. And of course, that discussion is about human overpopulation, and having traveled all over the planet on a bicycle and having seen it at 12 miles per hour, I am very deeply concerned about not only humanity's future, but the future of all creatures on this planet, all ecosystems on this planet, because, number one, the human race in the last 45 years grew from 3.5 billion people, that's B as in boy, to 7.3 billion, adding nearly 250,000 people every day net gain, on our way to adding another billion every 12 years and reaching somewhere around 10 billion, and some of the folks out there think it could be around 11 billion by 2050. So as a traveler and as a person who cares about the future, this is our watch. It's our time to stand up and speak out and to say something, to do something, so that we might change the history of humanity toward a viable and certainly sustainable planet and future for not only human beings and not all, and of course Americans, but all people on the planet and all creatures on the planet. So that's why I'm making my thoughts shared with anyone and everyone out there, because we're all in this together. This is not about race, creed, or color. It's not about religion. It's not about politics. It's not about any of the ancillary situations that you hear about on all the newscasts. This has to do with the human race and what we're going to do with ourselves, and are we going to survive our fecundity rates, our huge numbers. And of course, the way to do that is, again, to connect the dots and then take actions to change course so that we might have a livable planet and a viable civilization in the future, and that all of humanity and all of the natural world has the same ability to go forward here in the 21st century. So I'm excited about sharing all of this. In my book, America on the Brink, the Next Added 100 Million Americans, I really challenge anyone that reads it, and politicians that either do or don't understand it, to come to terms with the fact that carrying capacity cannot be exceeded. Carrying capacity is one of those things that you either live within the carrying capacity, or you simply go beyond the carrying capacity, and then Mother Nature stands in and makes herself known very quickly. And so when I call for the United States to literally cease all immigration, it stems from this one quote by Dr. Albert Bartlett of the University of Colorado. He said, and I quote, "Unlimited population growth cannot be sustained. You cannot sustain growth of rates of consumption of resources. No species can overrun the carrying capacity of a finite landmass. This law cannot be repealed and is not negotiable," unquote. The Nobel laureate Dr. Henry W. Kendall said, and I'm quoting again, "If we don't halt population growth with justice and compassion, it will be done for us by nature, brutally and without pity, and leave us with a ravaged world," unquote. That's the Nobel laureate. And of course, there's another quote that I will bring that's so important, and it's by Dr. Otis Graham, whom I also know personally, and he wrote Unguarded Gates. And he said, and I quote, "Most Western elites continue urging the wealthy West not to stem the migrant tide that adds 80 million net gain annually to the planet, but to absorb our global brothers and sisters until their horrid ordeal has been endured and shared by all. 10 billion humans packed onto an ecologically devastated planet," unquote. So those are some powerful quotes, and if they get into you, you have an understanding of exactly what we're facing. And so the reason for shutting down all immigration in the United States is simply this. We are already exceeding the carrying capacity of the 48 states here in the United States. California and 6 other states are having severe water shortages that are going to become even worse. And if we continue on the immigration path that we're on right now from the 1965 Immigration Reform Act, we added 100 million people from 1965 up until October of 2006. All of it virtually because of mass immigration. Teddy Kennedy and Howard Metzenbaum and Jacob Javits, the people in the Senate there, said, let's just open up the doors. And we had formerly been taking in about 150 to 175,000 per year. And that many people left the country. And so it was pretty much a balance, and we would have stayed and actually totaled out at a maximum of 250 million by 1990. But in fact, we're now at 321 million, and we're headed for 438 million, virtually all of it, 80 to 90% of it caused by mass immigration. I'll talk about population momentum later. And so the reason that we have to call for a total shutdown of immigration is because there's no end to the line. The third world is adding 80 million net gain per year, 1 billion every 12 years, and again, 3 billion by 2050. So if we just become and continue to become the exhaust pipe for all of this humanity from all of these third world countries who refuse to take responsibility vis-a-vis birth control and family planning, then there's nothing being solved, but in fact our country will be overrun and overwhelmed, our resources overrun and overwhelmed, our water resources completely exhausted, and of course the energy that it takes to maintain a civilization like this will be overwhelmed, because for most people that do not appreciate this, oil in the 21st century will run out. That is a fact. You can hear all the stories you want. It's called cognitive dissonance, intellectual denial of reality. And you hear it every day. I heard it from senators, I've heard it from governors, and I've heard it right on down the line. But the fact is, oil is going to run out, and there's no foreseeable alternative that is as powerful as oil. As a matter of fact, I'm going to quote James Howard Kunstler in The Long Emergency. I also know him personally. He said, and I quote, "The cheap oil age created an artificial bubble of plenitude for a period not much longer than a human lifetime. So I hazard to assert that as oil ceases to be cheap and the world reserves move toward depletion, we will be left with an enormous population that the ecology of the earth will not support. The journey back toward non-oil population homeostasis will not be pretty. We will discover the hard way that population hypergrowth was simply a side effect of the oil age. It was a condition, not a problem with a solution. That is what happened, and we are stuck with it," unquote. So as you can imagine, we're going to have to deal with our 321 million people and try to keep the tractors fed with gas just to create the foods that feed us. But can you imagine when oil depletes to the point where it costs so much, instead of $3 a gallon, it goes to $10 a gallon? Chris Steiner of Forbes magazine wrote a book called $20 per gallon. So I've seen a lot of life, and I've also seen a lot of the planet, and I've seen a lot of the third world on my bicycle at 12 miles an hour. So I didn't just fly in to see the Taj Mahal. I got to pedal in and then see the river running next to it, a giant sewer pipe of chemicals and plastics and everything else. What we don't see when we go to all these countries is all of the underlying consequences, such as in India, which is enormously overpopulated, at 1.25 billion people on its way to 1.6 billion. We don't see the nightmare of the Ganges. It creates a 20,000 square mile dead zone at the mouth of it because of all the chemicals and the sewage that's pumped into it. What does 138 million more people added to the America equate to? What does it mean? Well, what it means is it means a doubling of the populations of our 35 most populated cities. Think of New York City right now with horrible air pollution, traffic jams that are ceaseless and endless. The sewage is unbelievable. The use of energy is extraordinary. And at 8.3 million in 2015, it will hit 16.6 million, doubling of all of the consequences now going on in New York City. And then you see all of the poverty and the homeless and the misbegotten and the psychological and emotional basket cases. All of the crime and all of the human misery on levels that you can't imagine is because people are so crammed in. But then you take Chicago at 5 million and take it to 10 million. Look at the brown cloud over Chicago right now. I've been through Chicago probably 100 times in my life. And then you get to LA with 11 million people, and that jumps up to 22 million people. And in fact, the state of Florida, at 18 million people in 2015, will hit 36 million. California's growth rate is 1,655 people every single day of the year. 98% of that is caused by legal and illegal immigration. In other words, those people that are overloading their own carrying capacity of their countries are now fleeing those countries because they don't have enough water, they don't have enough food, they don't have jobs, they don't have schooling, they don't have anything. They've overrun the carrying capacity. Same thing in North Africa right now. Why do you think 1 million people are fleeing to Europe? It's because Africa is completely overwhelmed with 1.1 billion people. But you see, they haven't learned anything. Whether it's religions or whether it's cultures, they maintain their fecundity rates, their birth rates. And so Africa right now is going to jump from 1.1 billion to 2 billion by mid-century. So that's the reason that we need to stop all immigration into the United States of America and then help them in their own countries. Let's just use the metaphor of America as the Titanic. Right now, the Titanic is going too fast and it's headed toward a population iceberg. If we do hit that 138 million more added to this country within 35 years, which is a blink of time, then we then become the victim. Our country becomes a civilization that is unsustainable. You can't water the crops, you can't water the people, you can't feed anybody, you don't have enough energy, or it costs too much, or it's exhausting as you try to feed your people and warm them and transport them. And so hopefully this makes sense to you. Do you want every city in America to be doubled in population, whether it's Cleveland or Atlanta or whether it's Miami or it's Fort Worth or it's Dallas or it's Houston or it's San Francisco or it's Denver, which is on course right now to jump from 2.5 million to 5 million? Then you start talking about the air pollution, and then you start talking about the oceans warming up because of the carbon footprint, also the acidification of the oceans. Then you start looking at the species extinction rate. Here in the United States, about 250 per year species go extinct. That's why we need to stop mass immigration into the United States of America, and then create, obviously, a world conference and ask all of the top environmentalists and leaders from around the world to attend to come to terms with overpopulation. Because if we don't do that, then if we save all the immigrants, we will destroy our own civilization. That is a guaranteed fact. You cannot escape it. It will happen if we continue on this path. So that's what 138 million equates to, but also understand this: if we stay on that same path, the United States will hit 625 million before the end of this century. So now I hope you really got a handle on that, and Tim, that's the key. Once you understand this and you grasp it, and then what your children face because of it, you want to do something about it. One of the things I learned in my travels around the world on a bicycle, cultures and languages and religions are all warm and wonderful and fuzzy around the world until you start mixing them. And then when you start mixing them, you have cultural clashes, you have linguistic clashes, which, if you understand languages, each language and each person that is grown up with and learns under a certain language has a certain worldview. Somebody in Somalia growing up with speaking Somalian, having never had a bathroom or a toilet or a shower in his or her life, has a different worldview than an American citizen, than a Canadian, than a Frenchman, than an Italian. And someone from China who have been crowded in with over 1.3 billion people and speaks Chinese, they have a different view of the world, and their group is comfortable to them. And so each group is always comfortable with itself, and usually they congregate. Even in the United States of America, where it's been a melting pot until 1965, we had black, white, and brown. That's African American, Caucasian American, and Hispanic American, have a similar past, a similar language, English. But what's happening now, we have well over 42 million people in this country who are foreign-born. And within the next 35 years, that will jump to well over 100 million because of the immigration rates. And these people are not coming from sociologically compatible, religiously compatible, culturally compatible countries. They're coming from countries that are totally incompatible on many different fronts. So sociologically, the United States, which has continued to be a very successful country and civilization, is facing the consequences of bringing in 100 million people from 190 different countries with 190 different worldviews, but also different cultures, different religions, and some of them very incompatible with the American way of life. If you look at what's happening to Europe right now, and even up there in Canada, just to give you an example, Vancouver is now becoming a Chinese colony. I mean, it's a beachhead for China. Speaks Chinese, all the signage is Chinese. I watch China because I've gone to Alaska 5 times in my lifetime, and I've traveled up through Vancouver, back in 1974 when I took my first trip to Alaska, it was all Canadian. And now it's all Chinese. And the Chinese are literally running the Canadians right out of their own country. British Columbia could be the first colony of China. And because why? China is growing, as I said, even with one child per family, is growing at a rate of 8 million net gain every single year. And they're on their way to grow from 1.35 billion to 1.5 billion in the next 35 years. And they are actually running out of water, so much so that they're drilling into water that's like millions of years old down to the shale rock. And their rivers are all horribly polluted. Their air is polluted beyond understanding. They have, in China right now, they have car lanes, 50 car lanes. They have 100-mile gridlock traffic jams. And amazingly enough, with this growth of 8 million per year, even at one child per family, the real crisis is they're adding 27 million new cars on their highways every year now. 27 million more cars. Well, and here's the caveat to that. The world burns 84 million barrels of oil right now. That's the whole human race right now around the planet, 7.3 billion. Well, China, according to the James Howard Kunstler in the book The Long Emergency, figured it out that by 2030, China is going to be burning 98 million barrels of oil every single day of the year. There's no question that when you add all of these 190 different cultures and 190 different languages, they then will displace the American English language. They'll enclave, and when they enclave, they start doing the same thing the Chinese are doing up in Canada, in BC right now, British Columbia. They start taking over. In fact, in Michigan right now, where there's somewhere around 300,000 Muslims, all imported from different parts of Africa and certainly different parts of the Middle East, they've just started their first all-Muslim city council, and they have literally the ability to start implementing Sharia law, because as they gain the votes, they gain the power through the U.S. Constitution to change whatever they want in their arena. Add another 138 million Americans in the next 35 years. That means, again, the doubling of 35 of our most highest populated cities, and then we're doubling those populations. We're doubling the pollution, so the carbon footprint will be doubled, and then the water footprint will be doubled. And let me really explain one that will just really, no one ever talks about this one. It's called the ecological footprint. When you have an Ethiopian, and we're importing Ethiopians because they're overwhelmingly overpopulating Ethiopia, so we take on all their exhaust. An Ethiopian in Ethiopia lives at 0.4 acres to sustain that Ethiopian. So 0.4, that's 4/10 of an acre. But as soon as the Ethiopian gets here in the United States of America, that person, male or female, now has to be supported with 25.4 acres. 25.4 acres of land must be destroyed. That's wilderness that must be destroyed to create roads, malls, track housing, football fields, schools, hospitals, and of course put arable land to feed that person. That's 25.4 acres. If you add, let's just make it even, 100 million immigrants about to come into this country in 30 years. 100 million. Times 25.4 acres. That turns out to be 2.54 billion acres of land that will be completely destroyed, taken out of the wilderness setting, and then utilized to support all that 100 million. Once they're gone, you don't have the batteries to put into your car because you don't have the zinc, or you don't have the battery to put into your cell phone because you don't have the particular mineral or metal or heavy metal that takes care of that. And you start multiplying all of that, you start to see that the America that you all are coming and appreciate right now is going to come to a screeching halt, because there's no way to sustain it. So water, and then oxygen, clean air, pollution will, magnify by 138 million more people. So as you can see, there is nothing good going to come from this country adding 100 million immigrants and a total population load of 138 million people within the next 35 years. You can't think for a moment that somebody that comes out of the African bush comes over here and all of a sudden is just a super viable, American citizen. They aren't. They go on welfare. but they also bring their lack of standards, and they also bring their lack of intellectual horsepower. And so we're going to see more and more of the consequences of healthcare and the pileup, because all of this is being paid for by the American taxpayer. At some point, there will be no way to pay for it because there's not enough people that are working jobs to tax them enough to even pay for these services. So at some point, Tim, and every person listening to this broadcast, this thing is going to get out of our hands. In other words, we have the ability right now to solve problems, and we can deal with some consequences by changing direction. But at some point, the problems will be irreversible and unsolvable. And so it's either we do something or it's going to be done to us. And in the end, no matter what we do and no matter how much we avoid, if we don't deal with the numbers, then they're going to deal with us. In other words, you can ignore reality for a long time, but in the end, reality is not going to ignore you. So we have a balanced population here. We don't produce more than we should. We stay within the carrying capacity. But this immigration thing is what added that 100 million people, and it's the immigration that's going to add the next 100 million people that's going to blow us out of any sustainability. So, again, if we keep adding these people, then there are going to be more and more limits to our personal freedoms, and then there's going to be more and more limits to our freedoms in our cities. And then there's going to be more and more limits to the water we drink and how much we drink, and food, and what kind of food. The third world's not solving this thing. The third world's not changing. It's not becoming responsible for its fecundity rates, its birth rates. The caveat that I've explained, it's not sustainable, and it's not going to get any easier because it isn't sustainable. And we're all going to pay a severe price if we continue on this path. So we're doing some really nasty stuff. So tell me, do you think it makes any sense to add another 100 million immigrants to the United States and think it's all going to work out okay?
No, it's not going to work. Not at all. Well, you have given us a lot of information to contemplate, Frosty Wooldridge. I want to thank you for joining us today, and would you please tell everyone about your websites again?
Yes, and thank you for listening to this broadcast, and I want you to share it with anyone and everyone and get a conversation in your city, in your community, in your family, certainly in your state, and here across the United States. Talk to your politicians so it really make a difference. In order to solve this thing, you can go to some of these great websites, www.numbersusa.org, numbersusa.org, www.capsweb.org with Joanne Weidman, and then there's Balance, www.balance.org, and www.carryingcapacity.org. These organizations will help you become activated. Facebook, Frosty Wooldridge. You can friend me, or you can just go to my website and see my columns. I talk about overpopulation, immigration, and environment every week because I care about the planet and what's going on. You can go to frostywooldridge.com for my overpopulation website and what you can do to change course. Also, howtolivealifeofadventure.com is my adventure site. And on Facebook, I also have a page called How to Live a Life of Adventure, which has all my positive stuff. And in the end, if you want a beautiful country, a beautiful civilization, quality of life, and standard of living, the key is that you have to take action. You can't sit by and watch it idly consume you or overrun you. You have to stand up. You have to speak out. And when you do that, pretend you're one of your favorite heroes, whether it's Teddy Roosevelt or Susan B. Anthony or Eleanor Roosevelt or Dr. Martin Luther King or any of the heroes that you follow. John Muir, of course, is my hero. Well, you are the John Muir and the Dr. Martin Luther King and the Teddy Roosevelt of the 21st century. So your actions are going to make a difference. Whether you become famous or not, the key is that you did something to change America toward a positive environmental and viable future, and all of the rest of the creatures on the planet will benefit also. So let's get busy. It's our time, it's our watch, and thank you so much, and let's move ahead together.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Cosmic's Corner of the Universe. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in orbit. Cosmic's Corner of the Universe is a presentation of Thunder and Lightning Productions.